We're ready. And things happen behind the scenes that are sometimes challenging, technical challenges. But you know what? If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And we're right on time. We said we'll have our keynote coming up at 9:15, and I think he's almost here. Uh, and my next duty is to uh, introduce our keynote. But I've decided I'm not going to do that because Dr. Edwin Nichols is he's a luminary, and I think I'm going to have somebody else introduce him. So, I phoned a friend, and I'm going to ask that friend to turn that camera on now. Some of you may recognize this dear friend and a sister to me and a friend of Rochester. For those who don't know, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Joy DeGrew, my sister, my friend, my ride or die, a couple other things that, we call her late at night, say, hey, I got an idea. What do you think? But in all seriousness, Dr. DeGrew is how I learned about Dr. Nichols. And Doc, we know you're still working your way into the room. you know, this is a surprise for Dr. Nichols. He had no clue that this is going to happen. So in the meantime, I'm talking and, I'm looking, we're still looking for Dr. Nichols. I think he's in. We got to find out what he's in under so we can bring him up to the stage. But in the meantime, Joy DeGrew, how are you doing this morning?
I am well and happy, and I'm even more happy that you have invited me here.
Oh, look who just showed up.
Look who just showed up. The reason we're all here, right?
Perfect timing. And it's 9:15.
Of course, it's Dr. Nichols. Of course, he's going to be here on time. Um, I am excited and ecstatic to have been given the honor of introducing my mentor, my friend, my colleague, and a true leader of all people, but very much a leader of Black people. I want to say that I could start, but I'm sure that somewhere in there, there's a Vita, and there is his bio that tells you all the amazing things about Dr. Nichols. And you can read about his scholarship and his brilliance and his achievements and his awards. But I know him through his family. I know him through those cherished relationships of lifelong friends and lifelong colleagues. I know, of course, about his scholarship. I know about his doctorate, but perhaps most of us don't know that he typed his dissertation on a typewriter. And that not only did he type it on a typewriter, he typed it in High German. A lot of people don't know, they may know that he has these amazing, knowledge and information and publicate all of those things, but they don't realize that Dr. Nichols embraced the people he talks about. He walked among the people he talks about. So, unlike other researchers that find other researchers that look for other data and other references, Dr. Nichols lived and leaned in to the people that he talks about. And I think for me, my beginning was young. I was in my 20s, and I used to sneak into his lectures. That's how we started. I snuck into his lectures in Portland, Oregon, because I could not afford to be in the lectures and I wasn't invited to them. Okay. So I would just sneak in. And at that time, the best way to get in is to wear a badge and to have a clipboard. I'm not, endorsing that. Okay. But that's how I got in. Somehow they don't question you if you have a badge. So I would go in and sit in the back of the room. I'd listen to him, and eventually, no one had found me out, but he found me out. He kept noticing because I would get in there and I would be taking notes, and then there would be breaks, and then and so each time he would lecture through the day, I'd follow him. And he walked in the back of the room during the break. He said, "Are you following me?" And I said, "Please don't blow my cover. Please don't." And from that moment, he says, "You will always be my invited guest." And I was not only his guest, but I consider myself his family because he has always been there for me. And what Dr. Nichols is going to share with you today, he knew long before the sciences that recently showed up and talked about them. He knew because he lived a life that demonstrated the extraordinary model that he is going to share with you today. He recognized, like Harvard recognized after an 85-year study, that what we are is the sum of our relationships. And in order for us to be well, to move beyond trauma, we have to build and grow and support and nurture good relationships. And I'm grateful that I have such a relationship with my friend and mentor, and indeed my family, Dr. Edwin Nichols.
Oh. Oh. Well, thank you very much. I'm very excited. I love Joy, as you can see, and she is a brilliant, brilliant woman. And even though they tried to crush her concept of post-traumatic slave syndrome and give her a terminal master's and put her out of the program, she was able to get her doctorate. And it was a very important doctorate because she was able to put out what she wanted to put out and make it very clear that this is trauma that we experience. Now, today, we have additional studies in trauma. Epigenetics tells us that the genes carry over generations different experiences and trauma. And I'm old enough that I lived long enough to see the whole process of epigenetics, because whenever I made reference to my original work, I talked about Jung's collective unconscious memory that was in the back that brought things forward. Some people believed it, some said, oh, they poo-hooed it. But now we have epigenetic data that tells you that trauma is carried in the genes. And so with all the information that's carried in the genes, not just trauma, you have memories of your survival and thriving as an ethnic group, wherever you were placed in the world. And the fact that you were placed in different parts of the world makes it very clear that being in these different parts of the world, your experiences to survive and thrive would be different. And that is carried deep into the genetic memory that you have. And it comes forward even today in your behavior and your interactions with others. So with that, we'll start with the PowerPoint. My time is limited and I'm going to have to move as quickly as I can. I told Jerome that I need time like a Baptist preacher, 3-4 hours, but he said, we'll give you 45 minutes. So we're going to do the best that we can. All right, let's let's go to the next slide. All right. I went to Germany in 1955 as a student, graduate student, to work on my doctorate in industrial psychology. In 1956 at Tübingen, I was introduced to Johann Gottfried Herder, and you can see his work there, Ideen zur Philosophie der Geschichte der Menschheit, which translates, I don't like this man's translation, he says reflections. I would rather say more like constructs on the philosophy of the history of mankind. Now, what is very important about Herder is that he held implicitly to the view that society is basically an organic whole, okay? An organic whole. This accounted for the differences, for the difference rather, in culture and institutions of different peoples as being due to, well, here's the most important part, geographical conditions. So where your ethnic group started, wherever they were in the world, wherever they were, this coming together and how they survived and thrived in that place at that time is genetically carried through to today. Let's go to the next slide, please. Thomas Lambo, a Nigerian Yoruba, is the first Western trained psychiatrist. He's a world authority in child psychiatry. I got to meet him at the Menninger Foundation when he was a scholar in residence there. And I met him on a couple of other occasions. And when I was on my way to Nigeria to work, I went through the World Health Organization in Geneva and we talked. But on his trip going there, he encountered a Dutch reporter who asked him, are there broader cultural contrasts between Africa and the West that might account for the difference? Not differences, the difference. There's a difference in difference and differences. Lambo said, Africans believe in the relationship between man and man. Westerners increasingly believe in the relationship between man and object. Okay? So he has given me the axiology. And with that, next slide, with the years of philosophical training that I've had, required by where I went to school, I begin to think, well, let's put this into something that we can work with. In other words, what are the hangups when you work with people of different ethnic groups? You're in the same office, same job space, same community. What makes us different? And how can these differences sometimes be not beneficial because we don't understand the other person? Well, if I know the value system that you have is axiology. If I know how you solve problems, your epistemology. If I know how you reason to an answer, if I know these three things, then I'm pretty sure that I can understand how we can relate one to another. Therefore, I'm thinking about a cultural competence that each person has to have to be leaders, to be interacting with others. So cultural competence is the capacity to extract from others, to accept from others the uniqueness of their problem-solving skills. In the workplace, we have the ability to know an issue from the perspective of the staff with whom you work, the clients with whom you work, and most importantly, you can begin to understand your opponent. Next slide, please. All right. Human societies start in Africa and migrate out. Now, people have wanted to dispute that and do all kinds of things, but it's finally come down to genetics again. Everybody, all races, groups, what have you, started in Africa. The first migration out was toward Asia, which required behavioral adaptations to changing environments. To do what? Always thinking of what to survive and thrive. That's the most important thing. How are we going to be here next year? These migrations occurred over thousands of years. So if that first group coming out of Africa and going into Asia, they cross mountainous areas, miles and miles and miles and miles of mountains. How do you survive? And then you have desert, 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 desert. You have ice, snow, ice, snow. How do you survive in that kind of an environment and thrive? These are the questions that we have to examine in order to get to an axiology, an epistemology, and a logic system for different ethnic groups. The last migration out of Africa was into North Central Europe at the end of the last ice age. So the youngest of all ethnic groups are the Europeans. Next slide, please. Now, go back Okay, yeah, okay. I want to talk about essence. When we talk about the essence of ethnic difference, what what is an essence? And the job of the teacher is to try to formulate a way for people to understand what is an essence. So this is the game that I've come up with. I ask you, one, to close your eyes, two, to envision a specific noun, and three, to open your eyes and we discuss it. So everyone in the audience there, please close your eyes. Now, if you're peeping and your eyes aren't closed, you're paranoid and we have medication for you. Okay? So close your eyes. I want you to envision a chair, perhaps even your most favorite chair. And in your mind, take a snapshot of that picture. Open your eyes. Now, if we collected all of the pictures from everyone in the room and put them in a pile, and we said, take this pile and tell me what you see. Now, remember, they all look different from each other. But every person in this room would look at each picture and identify it as a chair. Now, why? Because we intuit the essence of chairness. You see, all of those are different. Those are the accidentals. But the core of what a chair is the essence. So the essence of ethnic difference is to go right down to the core. Not all these little things that swim around, frills, upholstery, woven, all those things. So now let's go to that slide now. So we intuit the essence of chairness. Now, intuit is the verb and intuition is the noun. So when I talk about intuition, it is through our intuition that we intuit the essence of chairness. You would never confuse it with the essence of a table. Even if I sat on the table, you would not be deceived by my behavior because the essence of the table has not changed. So let's be very clear about an essence. It's that which is endemic, which is always identifiable, which does not change. Next slide, please. In the United States, ethnic groups came from enslaved Africans, Asians to do the railroads in the West, Europeans to escape poverty, starvation, hunger. Native Americans were already here. Now, when we talk about ethnic groups, there are two groups of people that are definable not as an ethnic group, but as people who share an ethnic worldview. You see, to be Latino or Latinx, you could be white Latinx, black Latinx, Native American Latinx. You could be Jose Wong or Fujimori and still be Latinx. Now, how can those individuals all come together and be identified as Latinx or be identified as Afro-Arabs? There are three factors. One is a catastrophic event that changed everything for your forebears forever. Two, they were forced to speak another language exclusively. That's why we got a lot of collective memories and all kinds of things. And forced to convert to a new religion. So if you identify as Latin, your forebears were subjected to colonial Spain. They were forced to speak Spanish exclusively and forced to convert to the Roman Catholic Apostolic Church. So you can see that what you had as your own memory has now been pushed aside or crushed by this experience of sharing an ethnic worldview. For the Afro-Arabs, when you go from the west coast of Morocco all the way over to Egypt, across the north there, all these people call themselves Arabs, but if you look at them, they're different. Yet they call themselves Arabs. They are Arabs. Now, what makes them Arab? They were subjected to the Islamic wars of conversion. They convert to Islam, and they speak Arabic exclusively. Now, those three factors, you can have two of them, but not the third. So the Kurds were subjected to the Islamic wars of conversion. They convert to Islam, but they do not speak Arabic as their mother tongue. So they do not classify themselves as Arabs. And the same with the Assyrians and the Druze and many others who are having the similar experience of the Islamic wars of conversion and converting to Islam, but they see themselves as different because they do not speak Arabic as mother tongue. Next slide. Now, the imprint of geographical location. Groups of people migrated from one geographical location to another. And why did they do that? To meet their needs. That they, in order to meet their needs, they had to adapt to the environment in which they found themselves to survive and thrive. So if it's hot, what are you going to do? If it's cold, what are you going to do? Any place you go, you've got to figure out a way to survive and thrive. Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and what is very interesting, there's some new data that's come out saying that his ideas actually were formulated by Native Americans in Joy up there in your part of the country, in the Washington, Oregon area. He stayed with them for a long time, and then he developed his hierarchy of needs. That's just a little tidbit. All right. He says your physiological needs are very important, which is water and food and shelter. And then you want to be safe, a secure environment. Then is the desire to be accepted by others. And as we go through the different ethnic groups, you will find that in some places, those first two were already met by just simply where you were. And so you don't have to try to struggle to do those first two. You just simply work the desire to be accepted by others. So that says, there we are with the relationships again. See, that is based on where were you in the world at that time. And then self-esteem. And if you look at that, satisfaction of one's own work and what? Respect from others. That's going to be crucial as we move along. And then, of course, there's self-actualization. Next slide, please. Right? Now, we're going to look at Africa because Africa is the mother country from which all people come. In this context, the axiology, the highest value, lies in the relationship between people. Why? Because everything else that Maslow tells us that you had to have, they had by the environment. In that environment, would you ever go hungry? Because there was no food for you to eat. Food was omnipresent. Just half of the year, quarter of the year? No. Complete. Every day of the year, there was something to eat. Would you ever freeze to death and die? No. If it rained, could you take palm leaves and make a shelter to keep the rain off of you, the sun off of you? Yeah. So all of these things that Maslow talked about in his first and second steps, safety and so forth, is built in to just being born in Africa at that time of the development of world civilization. Okay? Now, Africa is the origin of human civilization, and all of these, if you look at the Maya Inca culture, that's we're getting at where people sometimes identify as Hispanic. Some very important things. Males and females in this culture are socialized to see each other as equals. How many times have you heard a Black woman say, I don't need him, I can take care of myself and my children? Now, that behavior comes out of the African context where women were seen as equal to men. And that equality is something that we carry forth today. Whenever we have a successful marriage, a successful relationship, a successful interaction, people see each other as equal. Now, by doing that, I don't know if you can see my hands or not. If we see ourselves as equal, and you do something that treats me as less than equal, you have treated me with what? Disrespect. And that destroys a relationship. You see, when people are working together, and they see each other as equals, and I perceive that you treated me, or you actually have treated me with disrespect, that destroys the relationship. There's no relationship left. Now let's go to Harvard University. You have two women. One is the president, and the other is the protagonist, is the antagonist. Why? Because one woman felt that because she was not acknowledged in the dissertation of the other woman, that she had been disrespected. There was no relationship. And therefore, she would do anything necessary to get even with the other person. Think about that. When we talk about race pride, what we need to do, and then something like that occurs, and you're trying to figure, well, why? Well, it goes back to a fact that it wasn't so much that all the notes and the footnotes and so forth. When we get to Western culture, you know why that's very important through counting and measuring. But the real thing was she was not acknowledged. And she felt that she had been disrespected in a relationship. All right, time. Every culture has its own time. Ours is astronomical. We've followed the whole stratosphere, we follow the stars. I'll get back the word in a moment. The whole universe, when you observe the universe, the stars, they are all working in a spiral. So, because that's how we perceive the spiral, we have it in our language. We say in Black English, what goes around comes around. In Latin culture, when are you going to do the work? Mañana. In Arab culture, when are you going to start the project? Inshallah. You see, all three of these groups have a different way of expressing the same idea because we share the same axiology, epistemology, and logic. Next slide, please. All right. These are things that Joy is going to discuss with you. Here we're talking about member to member. And we are talking about different places throughout the world that you can see how astronomy was used and understood centuries before even the measuring devices that we have today are no longer applicable. We can't duplicate what they've done. Because when they took some of these temples down in Egypt with all the precision that they had, they were not able to do the alignments inside the temple when what had been done centuries before. They dismantled these temples and took them someplace else. They just could not do it with all the instrumentation that they have today. So Joy will discuss some of these with you, perhaps. Next slide, please. Now, the Asian culture, you have to remember, this is the first group that comes out of Africa, and they can't get into Europe because the glaciers are there. So they have to go into what we know as the Middle East and then on out to China, Korea, Japan. The southern route is India. All right, let's go. In this, it says the highest value is in the cohesiveness of the group. So group being together, that's their highest value. not relationships, but group cohesiveness. Why? Because of the migratory tract. Question is, who has the responsibility when you go from point A to point B? Who has the responsibility for, did you bring the skins that go on the tent? Did you bring the rugs? Did you bring the food? Did you? Well, I thought you did. I thought, well, we don't survive that way in that kind of environment. So how do they make a division of work? The way they make that is they look to their symbolism, the yin and the yang. Remember the symbol of yin and yang? So yin and yang are male and female forces in balance and harmony. That's the other part. Not just balance, but balance and harmony, which means I accept what my responsibility is. Because I know that if I do what I'm supposed to do, you do what you're supposed to do, and we are in balance and not fighting each other. You're doing more than I am, you're doing less than I am, but in balance and harmony, then we are able to survive. So now, how does a group like this work? How do you stay in a group and keep it cohesive? Particularly when you have to make decisions about things. Do we go north? Do we go south? Which way do we go? So in order to do that, what I've learned over the years, if I look at traditional Chinese, this is not simplified, it's the traditional, and I look at the etymology of characters, then I have a better understanding of the culture. So if the highest value is in the cohesiveness of the group, what is group in traditional Chinese characters? What you see is you see one character, which is like king or monarch. So that's a power figure. It's an authoritarian figure. Then next to it, you see sheep. Well, anytime you're looking at the etymology of a word, you don't look just at the first information of the word. You look for deeper meanings. And as we go down sheep, we come to the concept of conformity. Sheep are conformist animals. So the idea of conformity, and you have this hierarchical system. So if you conform within the hierarchy, you have a group. So conformist within the hierarchy is group. Now, how do you get to cohesiveness of the group? That's the big one. Well, in cohesiveness of the group, you have all these people, all of them have different ideas. Well, how do you come to a consensus? When you write the Chinese word consensus, you have three major sets of characters. I'm going to start to the farthest character, and you see two things. You see the symbol for heart, and you see the symbol for voice. So what that is telling us, that in order to come to a consensus, your heart and your voice, your affect and your intellect have to say the same thing. Interestingly enough, if you see those two characters off by themselves, heart and voice on top and heart, that's the Chinese word for intent. So if I know how you think and feel, I know your intent. Now that is one of the characters, and right next to it is another character. Okay? And the next character then is, once I know your intent, then we can come together and speak through one mouth. So a consensus is when people have the same intent, everyone has exactly the same intent, not like we do. We're subject to say, are you going to help me with the program? Come. Are you coming to my meeting? I'm going to try as hard as I possibly can to get there. You see, that's not what the Chinese are doing with these two concepts together: your affect and your intellect, your voice and your heart, and therefore your intent. All right. Now, time in their culture it begins and ends at the same point. So I have a penny here, and this side has the head of Abraham Lincoln, and this has another design over here, shield. So when you look at this coin, you got heads. Now, at what point does heads cease to be heads and become tails? And at what point does tails cease to be tails and becomes heads? Well, that is the point at which it is the same point. Therefore, because it's the same point, time begins and ends at the same point. Now, when you turn the coin this way, you get into Hindu religion, where we go from life to death and death to life, and they are at the same point. All right, let's go down to the next slide. Here is the axiology that we have to really pay attention to because it is the dominant culture. It is Western civilization, and it dominates all of our experiences because we are subjected to it. The highest value lies in the object or the acquisition of the object. Now, object can mean many things. So let's go back to the example of what happened. Well, first of all, let's look at object as highest value. At the end of the last ice age, people were able to enter into Europe, but it was still a very cold and unpredictable environment in which to live. At most, the maximum growing season that they would have been 3 months. And in that 3-month period of time, they had to till the soil, plant the seeds, weed the crop, harvest the crop, preserve the crop, and store it for 9 months, because it would be 9 months before they could plant anything again. Now, concentrate on what that is, because if you fail, you die. So the people that we see that are of European descent, their forebearers lived in this environment and had to do what was necessary to survive and thrive. Otherwise, their gene pool wouldn't be here today. So what is the task? First of all, how do you know a month? There are no calendars. So this is where women have knowledge that men do not have. 1 month is the menstrual cycle for all practical purposes. All right? 9 months that you've got to store food and save it so you could not eat up too much and what have you, and last that 9 months. How long is that? That's gestation. So the concept of math is in the very genetics of women, in their very existence. And therefore, they learn math, predictions, judgments about math computations centuries before men can grasp the concept. So this gives women one object that men do not have. All right, now let's go on. In the European culture, women are subordinate to men, but we'll talk more about that. Linear is time. Time begins at A, it ends at B. All right? Time begins at A, it ends at B. There is no B prime. Nichols, what are you talking about? You plant at A and everything has to be done by B. All that food has to be stored and preserved. And if it's not, any extension beyond that, you'll be dead because the winter is already there. You don't have the choice of a week or 2 weeks beyond the 3 months because the winter is there and you'll be dead. Now, that's extremely harsh. So what does it mean to Europeans to do something from A to B? Well, let's look. Time. If you are in Germany and you come late to work, your boss says to you, Hans, warum bist du spät angekommen? Why are you late? He says, es tut mir sehr leid, Herr Doktor. Ich habe den Bus verpasst. Ich habe den Bus verpasst. I missed the bus. How on earth can you miss a German bus? German buses are never late. They're always on time. So where is the problem? Who is at fault? You are. So now what am I going to do to you to punish you, to change your behavior? I'm going to go to the highest value, which is the object. I'm docking your pay. I'm taking away from you the object. Think about that. So he knows that if he comes late, he's going to lose pay. Now let's see what happens to Leroy. Leroy has to take 2 trains and a bus to get to work because he lives on the other side of town. And he's got to take a streetcar and a bus and then transfer, and connections aren't like they're supposed to be. So he comes late. Now, his axiology is that the highest value is in the relationship, and he wants to maintain the relationship. So his boss says to him, "You're late." He says, "I'm here now." Trying to maintain the what? The relationship, keeping things light. His boss says, "And I'm going to dock your pay." He doesn't want his pay docked. So he says, "I'm sorry, I came late. I'll stay late." Well, what Leroy is thinking is that he can do B prime. Because if you came in at A prime instead of A, you can do B prime. But for your European boss, there is no B prime. Because at the end of B, if you don't do it, you're dead. That's all it is to it. Well, Leroy still wants to maintain the what? He doesn't want to destroy the what? The relationship. So he says, he tried once by talking about he would come late. He says, "I'll make it up during lunchtime." He's willing to forego his lunch in order to accommodate his boss with his time thing that his boss is talking about. And the boss says, the interval from the beginning of lunch to the end of lunch is less than the interval from A to A prime when you arrived. And he's so frustrated, this is crazy. Because if I keep going like this, I'm going to cuss him out. Well, we don't want that. So what does Leroy do? He says, "Man, if you're that upset, I'll come back tomorrow and work." And he goes because he doesn't want to destroy the relationship. Now, going to the head of the European. Oh, you see, he must have money left over from the weekend. He didn't drink it all up. All these negative concepts. This is negative thinking. Okay. Or he doesn't want the job, or any number of things. But what Leroy is trying to do is prevent destroying the relationship. Because he's got to work with this man. Okay. But the other person is thinking only of the object. Time was lost. Now, why is that so important? Well, let's see how it, not centuries ago, but how does it work today? Your boss says, "I want the deliverable by close of business today." And you're working on it, working on it, working on it, working on it. And you look up and it's 3 o'clock and he has gone for the weekend. That's Friday. He's gone on home. So he won't be back till Monday. So you figure, well, I'll get it on Monday morning. Now, you did put it on his desk, or you didn't send it to him by email, so he has a timestamp that says when it was turned in. And you turn it in sometime over the weekend. He looks at the timestamp and says to you when you come in, "The report was late. I don't want it." Say, "Why?" And his response to you is, "You missed the deadline." Do you see how all this language comes to us from the collective unconscious memory, from those genes? It just keeps coming out. The deadline. Why would we call it the deadline? Because if you didn't do it back then, you were dead. All right. Now, do we see people as objects in the workforce? Yes, we do. We see people as objects because if you're writing for a factory saying how many people have to work on which line and how long and what have you, the individual is referred to as a unit of production. We don't talk about the number of people, we talk about the number of units of production, which says you are an object. It's nothing personal, it's just the way people think. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, women all over the world had knowledge that men did not have. Centuries before men could grasp the concept. By observing animals, they observed when they were ill, the animal is sick or throwing up or something. There were roots, herbs, barks, and grasses that they nibbled on to do better. And particularly when a small animal was in distress trying to deliver, they would nibble from a certain branch or little trees over there or little bushes, dilate and deliver. Well, when women are in distress, they begin to nibble on those same leaves. And therefore, women developed a pharmacopoeia based on their observations with roots, herbs, barks, grasses, roots, and leaves. They've later found out that you could preserve food with those same roots, herbs, barks, grasses, roots, and leaves. Because dill weed tea will keep you from vomiting, and dill weed will pickle many, many vegetables. The other great knowledge that women throughout the world had was counting and measuring, long before men could grasp the concepts. So the question is, how did men respond in different cultures to this? Well, in Asia, yin and yang, balance and harmony. The African, men and women are equal. All right. Now let's see what happens in Europe. Next slide. If the highest value is in the object, okay, power is, knowledge is power, which equates to what? The object. So for European men, it meant that the object would be controlled by whom? European women. So they do what to the rules? They change the rules. They develop a hierarchical system where women are subordinate to their husbands. How far do they go with this? Women are the property of their husbands. Further, the woman's dowry becomes her husband's property. Okay? And in English common law, wives can be physically disciplined, which means he can hit her with a stick. Now, that's all law. I mean, I didn't make it up. It's there to look at. Okay? Whenever women begin to understand ovulation and practice some form of regulating when they got pregnant, those women who knew that information were called Cronin, and they had Cronin societies. And whenever men found that that was going on, they would kill the witches, that's what they would call, and they would destroy those societies to keep women ignorant of their own ovulation cycle. And if we had time in Judaism, the mikveh provides higher frequency of male births than female births in order to have an army to fight off the oppressors. All right, now let's put that into the African experience. Men and women are socialized to see each other as equal. If you took the biggest man in the room and you had put him back centuries ago, even to today, or even centuries ago, with three women standing there, let's suppose he has three wives. He's standing there. I use this sometimes when I'm physically present. I ask the biggest, tallest black man to come up and stand, and he has three wives, and he's all proud, laughing. And I say, okay, now, do you feel in any way inadequate or different from European men? Do you feel in any way inadequate to a European man? No. All right. Then I say, you know that their women are subordinate to their men? Yes. That their women are the property of the husband? Yes. The dower's wife becomes the husband's property? Yes, yes, I know all that. And the English common law permits them to physically discipline their wife. Yes, I understand all that. I say, now, out of these three black women standing up here with you, which one you going to take her money and beat her with a stick? It's such cognitive dissonance because We are not the same axiology, epistemology, and logic. We don't share the same history. We are different. Not good or bad, just different. That's all. Next slide, please. All right, this is Native American. I won't go too deeply into it, only to say that seasonal migration is how they survive. They move. The Great Spirit tells them, here is where the best place to live for this season. And then you move to another place. So migration, directed by the Great Spirit, is how they survive. Women are an integral part of all decision making. Benjamin Franklin was going to try to think of confederation as a possible way for the American colonies to come together. The person who knew the most about it was this Iroquois chief. And in 1744, he came to one of those meetings. And when he got there to talk about confederation, he saw all these white men sitting there. And he asked, where are your women? Because in their culture, you don't make any kind of decision, any kind of group meeting at all, unless the women are there to give input. So it was cognitive dissonance for this man. Time begins and ends when we get together, when we are together physically. So if you come from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and you're waiting for me to start a 9 o'clock meeting, an 8 o'clock meeting, before I come to you, because I'm spiritual, I have to cleanse myself to be sure that the Great Spirit will help me to better understand what you're going to talk about in this treaty you want me to sign. So I might be in a sweat lodge. Well, when you enter the sweat lodge, you can't say, I'm scheduled for a 9 o'clock meeting, and I have to be out of here by that time. No, you're there for the time that it takes. Now, when does time begin? It begins when we are physically together. I was listening to Baha'i broadcast one time. It was first, in Canada, they call him First Nations person, sitting there giving us a lot of information. And he told us, when the family comes, I'll have to close this meeting. Okay. So we were talking long over the time that he was supposed to be talking, and he just kept talking. And then all of a sudden he said, I have to go now because the family has come, and he had to go and meet him. That means their time began at that point. All right. The medicine wheel is very important because it tells you their thinking is always in sets of 4 and sets of 3. We'll come to that later. It's always that cyclic thinking. Next slide, please. Epistemology. How do we know things? Well, intuition is the way we know. And the way you describe it is symbolic imagery and rhythm. Symbolic imagery are proverbs and parables and that. And rhythm can be sounds. It can be functions or flows. So the best way to crystallize these things is to think of jazz. Jazz encompasses this epistemological model. Symbolic images, rhythm, function. There's no one standing saying, now you come in, like at a classical symphony orchestra. You have to hear what those 3 notes are that the person started out with. You have to embellish it with your instrument in the same key or different key, and you have to play enough so that the next person can pick it up, and the next person pick it up, and then all of you come together at the end. Now, what is that? What kind of knowledge is that? That is symbolic imagery and rhythm. Now, I cannot go to a European audience and talk about symbolic imagery and rhythm unless I transliterate my way of knowing into their way of counting and measuring. So on the job, sometimes you through intuition, we're working out a plan to do something, you say, this is the way to do it. And you express it. And they say, no, 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 put it into something that I can know, which is counting and measuring parts to the whole, linear sequential. I'm thinking, how am I going to do that? Well, let's take this example. How did Nichols transliterate it into something, symbolic imagery and rhythm, that Europeans could understand? It took a long time, all right? But rhythm, if a nurse puts a stethoscope in her ear, she listens to the rhythm of your heart. If the heart is out of rhythm, it is not functioning properly. And EKG are symbolic images on a piece of paper. And if the heart is out of rhythm, you can see the inconsistency on this piece of paper, which are symbolic images. Now, if we're working on a team and you don't let me tell you a better way of doing it right now, but you force me to try to transliterate it into something that you can count and measure, we lose time. The productivity of the team is lost. So we have to begin to accept that other people can know things in different ways that we don't have to prove. Now, one other way, when we talked about sounds, this young man, you're a young woman, you're going to college and you say, here's the wonderful man, I'm going to marry this man. He's so well educated. You bring him home and everybody talking about all the degrees he has and how much money he's earning. And it's just going on. And way in the back of the room, sitting in a chair, his grandmother, and she just simply said, did you hear it? Now, what did that mean? Through her intuition, her knowledge base, she already told you, he ain't all that. And of course, you're looking at all the things. But she's already told you, and about 6 months later, you know it is really. All right, let's go now to the next. Let's go back. Let's go back. Our thinking is holistic, and the big picture is what we're looking at. And critical path analysis is how we solve problems. Okay, so you want to get holistic thinking, critical path analysis, big picture, cut to the chase. Go to the next one, please. Let's keep going. One more. Okay, Asian. Theirs is a transcendental striving. So if you know the tree, you transcend, you know the forest. If you know a blade of grass, you know the meadow. If you know the physics of a thimble of water, you know the physics for the whole oceans. So it's going from the very tiny experience that you study completely and you transcend to its universality. The best thing in English that can get that is Leibniz-Monad. That's it's actually in German, but there's an English translation. But that's the best way you can see the idea of transcending in Western literature. Pedagogy, parts and whole are seen simultaneously. All right, now let's examine that very quickly because that's important. In order to read a Chinese character, there's the character. You have to be able to see the whole character, and inside the character, all of the different strokes. And it all must be seen simultaneously, or you cannot read Chinese. You cannot read Chinese if you cannot see the whole character and the position of each stroke simultaneously. There is no chip, you can't look at a character and start going through looking for sounds or phonics or something. The character complete, or you can't read. Now, what is important methodologically is they do cyclic repetitive. So when you see young Chinese children writing, if you had 1,000 Chinese in the room and you asked them to write different characters, the stroke order would be written exactly the same for every person, because that's how they memorize the concept of whole. Now, let's go to the next slide, which is European. This culture is counting and measuring. The pedagogy is that you look at parts that become the whole. And the Western culture always goes back to its Greek origin. So who tells us parts to the whole? That there are tiny particles that swim in the ether and come together to constitute some wholeness. All right? That's Democritus or Democritus, wherever he went to school. He was an atomist. So he says that there are small particles, and these small particles he called atoms. Now, when Western physics advanced to the point that they could realize that there were very tiny particles that came together to form an essence, or substance. We name them atoms. So that atom comes from Democritus. The methodology is linear sequential. All right. So if you have parts that become the whole, and you count and measure all of the parts, so you have the assembly line. That's linear sequential. One person stands here and puts something onto the car. It moves along on the assembly line, linear and sequential. Sequential, somebody else adds something else, someone adds something else. So linear and sequential is Henry Ford's Model T. Everybody put something onto the car. Before that, people were saying, here's a team of 6 people and they put together a car. But you see, that was such a long, arduous thing. And one person may know something that the other person didn't. Put it this way, all you have to do all day long is put that part on there, put that part on there. So now let's talk about how people develop things within their society. When you go to the grocery store, you pass something and there is a barcode on there. And that barcode is linear and sequential. Now, when you go back to the Asian group, where people have to see the whole and the parts simultaneously, what was developed by a Japanese that is similar to the barcode, but it employs their epistemology? It's the QR. A QR, you have to see, the machine has to see it, how? All those little dots and spaces, how? Simultaneously. It doesn't do a linear sequential. It just sees the whole thing at once and makes a decision. You see, 2 groups of people using their epistemology, not good, not bad, just different. Now let's look at one other factor. All right, another factor is this, and I'm going to be through. Another factor is very important. Here's the other factor. We have crossword puzzles, don't we? Okay. That's linear and sequential, isn't it? Now, what do the Japanese have for us? Huh? Sudoku. You can go all the answers this way, but when it comes down this way, it doesn't fit. You can go all the answers this way, but when it comes this way, it doesn't fit. So you see, our approach was linear sequential, but the Japanese mind is saying, I have to see the whole and the part simultaneously. All right, I'm going to call it quits. We've looked at all the axiology, epistemology, and logic sense. And let's ask if there are questions or if there's time for questions.
We're going to have Dr. Joy come back up and sort of, wrap it up with you, Doc, regarding this knowledge that you've shared in your Baptist minister time, and how that knowledge of knowing one's axiology and epistemology can help all of us individually and collectively on the path to wellness and the healing that we all so dearly need. Looking for Dr. Joy, paging Dr. Joy. Come back up the stage. So I know she's still around. But that part, Doc, again with the theme, and as you and I talked, often about how knowing one's axiology and knowing one's epistemology, there she is, will help all of us on that pathway to wellness. So, Dr. Joy, I'll be quiet and have you interrogate Dr. Nichols in terms of the philosophical aspects of cultural difference, consistent with the conference theme.
So part of what,
and you're muted, of course. Yeah, of course you're muted.
I didn't. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
See, the power is all on your end. I was pushing buttons. Okay, so what is so wonderful about what Dr. Nichols' philosophical aspects of cultural difference is it allowed me to operationalize my work. So now, because the question is, how do I utilize that information into some practical steps in terms of how, for example, you motivate children in school. Such an important thing, you know, he's not motivated. Right? You hear parent come, the child's not motivated. Well, what are you doing to motivate the child? And one of the things I learned from Dr. Nichols, and again, if you can't apply it, it becomes purely philosophical. And what I did was I wrote something called the relationship model based on Dr. Nichols' model, which was tested by Northwest Regional Educational Laboratories and was proven to be effective in increasing grade point average, removing negative referrals, engaging Black parents, Black and Latinx parents into their involvement with their kids, and overall retention in school. That's what my model was able to produce because I was able to operationalize what it was Ed was saying. So let's just look at that one piece, which he taught me. We're motivating the kids. So preschool, we're talking about the very little ones, right? They're sitting cross-legged on the floor, and we're saying, and the teacher says to motivate all the students, if you'd get all of your work done today, I'm going to give you a star. And all the little kids go, oh my God, I'm going to get a star. I'm going to get a star. They do all their work. They go home and say, Mommy, look, I got a star. Great, great. That's Monday. Tuesday, same thing. I got a star. Wednesday, Trey, Jose, White Horse, you know, the kids of color are like, I'm not doing all that for no star. I can make my own star. In fact, I got some stars. I could sell you some stars. Would you like some stars? Because a star is an object. My expectation is that you're going to work for the object. It could be a smiley face. It could be an A. It could be a B. But what I started to realize with a lot of children of color, particularly Black children, that's not always enough. They'll do it for a while, but then they're told they're not motivated, they're distracted, they have ADD. No, they're just not motivated by a star or a B or a C. But here's what I did, because I'm keeping in mind the highest value lies in the relationship. Hey, come on over here, Trey. Jose, White Horse, come on over here. Put my arm around him. I said, you know what? You gonna get that work done for me today? Yeah, Miss Joy. They did it for the relationship. And it's interesting because this is not, what I'm talking to you about is not philosophical. It's literally written in to how we engage with children of color. Ed talked about greeting, right? And everybody, all these different ways that we engage. Can you walk into I'm a big grown up. I'm 66 years old. You walk up to me and I'm in a situation, you hire me. Jerome, let's say Jerome hires Dr. Joy. I'm in the room. We know the timing, the planning, all the stuff. I have what I'm supposed to do. And Jerome walks up and goes, okay, so Joy, I'm going to need you. Hello, good morning. You know, you're not going to ever, you know, there is a certain level of respect that is cultural. I don't care what it is. You could be paying me. But what my expectation is that you're going to acknowledge me first. And I can't tell you how many situations I've been in where they go, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even say hello. You know, you didn't, you know. So it's not just the little ones. And those of us that are big grownups that have to keep the lights on, we will, you know, we will brace for it. And we're always bracing for that being disrespected, right? Because it's not part of the protocol. The most important aim here is the job. The most important thing here is for you to pass the test in the class. It is not whether or not I engage you. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's not, again, of course we got to cross the T's and dot the I's, but I should be able to show up as my full self in doing that. And what I was able to identify is that's absolutely possible in the very kids, because they threw every kid at me that they didn't want in the classrooms. And those kids went from, I don't know how you can in middle school have a 0.1 grade point average and still be coming to school. Those kids graduated 3.5. Right? I believed in them. I embraced them. And my expectations were high for them. And so again, I mean, this is certain, when I say Dr. Nichols' work is a foundation of what built not only the relationship approach, which is now my model, but it built the apparatus for dealing with historical trauma. because I can't fix what I don't understand and I can't speak about. It's like, last thing I'll say, everybody has a measure. There's some people that can come in my house right here and go, "Hey, Joy, how you doing?" Go right to the refrigerator, open it up and look in there. Right. And there are other people that will come, "Hey, Joy, how you doing?" I'm going, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, excuse me. Can I get you something?" Okay. Can I get you something? Because you don't get to go and open my refrigerator. You don't have a what with me. You don't have that kind of a relationship with me. And so when I recognize that we have, each group of people, we operate based on those very things, our axiology, our epistemology, our sense of logic, except we're in a society that touts this notion of multiculturalism, of inclusion, of a cultural sensitivity and humility, all of these different things. But at the end of the day, I'm going to need you to act, walk, and look like me. And when you don't, you pay the cost. That's 2024. I'm not talking about something in the past. I'm talking about we have a monocultural control system operating out of one axiology and basically utilizing, or in some ways extorting, other cultures and benefiting from what they bring without them having a seat at the table. Yeah.
Excellent. We're close to the close, and thank you for that, especially the context and taking the philosophy of Dr. Nichols and giving some practical applications, because again, back to the theme of our conference, Beyond Trauma, a Journey to Wellness. And what strikes me over and over again, as our work at Action for Better Community, and so many of our colleagues who are on this call right now, many other folks are in the trenches doing the work and trying to literally take action to make this community better. And with the knowledge of knowing one's axiology and epistemology will aid us to get on that path to wellness. And indeed, the panel coming up after this is going to be a really diverse group of people who are going to talk about wellness from a variety of perspectives. But Dr. Nichols, I want to give you the opportunity to sort of put a bow on it and some closing comments. And again, just thank you first, and hopefully the gift of relationship that I was able to give you this morning and having Joy here, hopefully that is received with the intent that it was sent.
That's very touching to me, and thank you very much for that. Joy, I'm just beaming. I am. What I would like to say, the theme is moving beyond trauma. And you cannot move beyond something that you do not know what it is. So we have to look introspectively into what was the trauma and how does it persist to be traumatic for us today. And once we have that reality, then we can move beyond. But unless you know what was and what is that trauma, some of it goes way, way back, some of it's current, then we will not be able to move beyond it. Now, like Joy said, greetings. How many times have you gone into work, break your face saying, good morning, and nobody says anything? That is we call them microaggressions to all these, but those are little traumas because it hits at your whole value system and says, what you value is not important. So until we can recognize what is necessary to move beyond trauma, we can't move beyond it until we can recognize how traumatically we feel. So let's look at that one thing which is black, then I'll be through. I used to get on the elevator in this building. I was, very few blacks working in there. And white women would jump and, they would do all these things. And that would give me trauma. It's like, I don't want your person. I would be very upset. So finally, I decided I would just reverse it. So whenever the door would open and a white woman would go down, I'd say, what's wrong? What's wrong? I said, you startled me. You frightened me. And then, of course, it got all around the building. Everybody would open the door and say, all right, Nichols, I'm going to startle you. Well, I broke the trauma because I made a joke out of it. It's not traumatic for me now when people don't say good morning or what have you. I just attribute it to their lack of home training or to their axiology, epistemology, or logic. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Enjoy. I love you, sweetheart. I love you very, very much.
And we love you, Dr. Nichols. And Dr. Joy, you know, hey, it's just a phone call away. Thank you very much for this, what would I call it? You know, so thank you. And that concludes Dr. Nichols.